engaging the community since 1970. This is WIS Awareness.
Good morning and thank you for joining us for Awareness. I'm your host, MEAGHAN Norman. It is estimated 35 million Americans are suffering with Alzheimer's disease. That number is expected to double in 20 years to 65 million by 2030. Pat Summit, who is the head coach of the University of Tennessee Lady Volunteer basketball team, died in July after battling early onset Alzheimer's. She was 64.
There is no life I know to compare with pure imagination.
Beloved chocolate creator in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, Gene Wilder died in August at the age of 83 after complications from Alzheimer's. He never disclosed his dementia diagnosis. A statement after his death from the family revealed Wilder had been, quote, coexisting with the disease for 3 years. Wilder told his family he chose to keep it private because he could not bear the idea of one less smile in the world. Other celebrities who have died with the disease include former President Ronald Reagan and singer Etta James. Dementia not only has debilitating effects on those who've been diagnosed, but also on the loved ones and their caregivers. Too often it's kept hidden as those dealing with the disease struggle in silence. Here to talk about the signs, symptoms, progression, and how to provide the best care, Macy Smith and Sir Wesley Funches Jr. Macy is a social work educator who's been helping families understand dementia and related conditions. Wesley is a physician's assistant with East Charlotte Family Physicians. Thank you both for joining me this morning.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Let's start with some definitions. What is Alzheimer's? What is dementia? Often we hear those two words used interchangeably. Are they one and the same?
They're not. They could be interdependent. What we would like for people to know is that Alzheimer's disease is only one type of dementia. Dementia is the umbrella term, and there are over 100 causes. We see 60 to 70% of the dementias associated with Alzheimer's disease. Dementia itself is the symptoms of a medical condition impairing a person's cognitive state, which number one cause is Alzheimer's disease, but there are other causes that are just as prominent.
Yes, when you look at dealing with dementia, there's Lewy body dementia, excuse me, mixed dementia. There's a plethora of different other causes for dementia. So as she stated, dementia is the umbrella. Alzheimer's is just one of the prongs on the umbrella.
And what are some of the signs and symptoms that we typically can see in a patient?
Well, if you're looking at signs and symptoms dealing with dementia, they usually say altered mental status, which is, a possible symptom. It could be other things that could cause it. Loss of being able to pay attention. People say that their attention is not the same. Mm-hmm. And like she said, cognitive function. When you're dealing with cognition, you're dealing with your ability to think and use your five senses. And what Alzheimer's does is it's basically like if you can imagine a satellite, if you have a thunderstorm, it's hard for the signal to get through to your satellite, so it says signal loss. So what Alzheimer's does is it creates a plaque, so the signal can't get through.
Right.
Like if I had Alzheimer's, I could see you and I could understand that you are here and I am here, but it would be hard for me to project that or say that in a manner in which that you could understand it, because the thunderstorm is clouding the signals in order to receive the signals that I need. Yes.
Cannot communicate properly.
That's right.
And then when you look at some of these signs and symptoms, poor judgment or increased poor judgment.
Absolutely.
Someone who usually makes good decisions now, just not.
Right, and we associate that to the blockage. The information is not connecting from one neuron to the next. Mm-hmm. And what we typically see is that they're unable to think abstractly. So when you're making good decisions and making judgment that's abstract, they become more concrete thinkers. And one of the typical signs we tend to see early on in Alzheimer's disease is recent memory loss. But not only recent memory loss, but the inability to backtrack your steps. We've always, forgotten where we've parked our cars at the store, but we can think back to where we saw it last. Someone living with a progressive form of dementia, they may experience difficulty remembering those things or thinking abstractly, and also being able to perform familiar tasks such as cooking dinner.
Right. And I think what's difficult for some people to understand when they look at this incredibly debilitating disease is it seems to be a mental condition, so it's not something that people can see physical signs, so they don't really maybe understand it as clearly. One thing that I had trouble understanding was, how can someone die from dementia or from Alzheimer's? How does that work?
Well, what happens is that when you're dealing with these plaques that are being formed in the brain, if it cuts off a specific part of the brain that controls maybe breathing or heartbeat or things like that, some of those things can also cause a lot of issues as far as the cause of death. Now, if you're dealing with other types of dementia, there's mixed dementia, there is vascular dementia where it's affecting the blood vessels. I mean, patients who have had strokes, patients who have had other issues like that, that can also cause major significant issues and even resulting in death.
Well, and I was going to ask you, so if someone has maybe an MS diagnosis or has had a stroke, does that increase their chances of possibly developing dementia?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Any type of impairment to the central nervous system or to a person's cognitive state does increase their risk. Doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to get it, but it does increase their risk. Wesley talked about vascular disease. Vascular dementia is the second largest cause of dementia. Also, dementia with Lewy bodies, that's the third largest cause of dementia. We typically hear Alzheimer's disease, but there are a growing number of other diseases. We have advancement in diagnostic testing, and so the ability to identify these particular conditions early on is becoming more robust. And so you talked about some of the other early symptoms, more anxiety, personality changes. Those are some other indications that something may be occurring in the cognitive state of a person. Doesn't necessarily mean a progressive form of dementia, but it does lend itself to a medical condition that needs to be actually looked after.
And how prevalent are we talking in terms of numbers with how many people who are suffering with dementia and or Alzheimer's?
When we look at worldwide, there are approximately 47 million individuals worldwide suffering from a form of dementia. Again, there are several causes. In South Carolina, we're looking at 84,000 individuals living with Alzheimer's disease, which is the #1 type. And when we look at the 60 to 70% of dementias being Alzheimer's disease, an additional 20% is the vascular disease, another 15% may be Lewy bodies and frontotemporal dementia.
And what are some of the ways we can help some of these patients and these caregivers? I know there's a great series of workshops that you have been a part of.
Absolutely. Education is the foundation for understanding the progression of the disease. It doesn't come on suddenly. It is gradual. So being able to understand what to expect will prepare family caregivers the ability to prepare to care for this challenging population. And we typically see challenging behaviors, but I don't consider the behaviors challenging at all. They're responsive. Because of the plaque buildup and the inability for information to exchange properly, they're responding in a manner that they know how to respond, and that's what they still have the capability to do.
And I think that one of the things that does necessarily need to be said is that it is a progressive disease. Like, it gets chronically worse. So another reason why it's more difficult for people to see a difference is because it starts off with, I can't find my keys, and then it progresses to, I lost my, I couldn't find my car in Walmart, and then all of a sudden one day they drive to Walmart and then they can't drive home. But by then, that's when they're calling and saying, oh, my mother is forgetting things now. There's been a progressive thing, it's been progressively going on, but these are just absent-minded things, and they don't necessarily think that needs to be worked up. But the sooner that we can get them in to see the doctor, the sooner we can get the test done, the sooner we can diagnose it, that actually helps prolong life.
And is that something that you see in your practice on a regular basis, just families not really understanding or having trouble understanding how this disease works and its progression? Yes,
and it's twofold. One is not understanding the progression, and that's one spectrum, and then there's the other spectrum of they think that is the automatic diagnosis. Like, I've had cases where I've had patients who've come in, well, the daughter brings the mother in because there's a family history of dementia and mom's been forgetting stuff. But it turned out they had something called urosepsis, or they had a stroke, or they had a heart attack or something like that. So it takes, you can't necessarily diagnose dementia as soon as they walk in. You have to do a complete workup, make sure there aren't any other secondary causes that you can correct and reverse that you can actually work on, as opposed to just automatically assuming it. So I see one aspect where you have the patients, oh, my mother has dementia, and then you have the other ones that they think, oh, mom's just forgetting, and then by the time that they see us, it's already in moderate stage.
Right, this is a really critical conversation to have, and a lot of information out there for people. Briefly, just tell us about the Dementia Speaks workshops and where people can find more information.
So the Dementia Speaks workshop is hosted through the Columbia Urban League, which is the nation's largest nonprofit organization that affects change in the African American communities. We know from statistics that the African American population is 2 to 3 times more at risk for developing this progressive disease, and the Latina population is also at highest risk. So partnering with the Columbia Urban League to promote these particular education events was seamless. And with these education events, it's a common sense approach to caring. We talk about the basic information that family caregivers need in order to have that meaningful, enriched conversation with clinicians. The series are held throughout Richland County in the Columbia area. We will be at the Laurie Center on Thursday evenings and at Drew Wellness Center on Saturdays. It's specifically designed for family caregivers. We connect them to resources in the community that they may not know exist. We're partnering with the Alzheimer's Association to offer free sitter services. That's something that family caregivers, especially in the African American and the Latino population, don't take advantage of, because we do want to shield our secrets. We don't want people to know, but what you don't talk about could ultimately kill you, especially as a caregiver not getting that relief.
And that's one thing that I think that there is a disconnect. There's a disconnect between caregivers and providers as far as what information we'll need before they actually come into their appointment.
Yes.
That way we can be able to better diagnose and treat their family or their parents or whoever they are taking care of. So hopefully with this outreach, we're able to bridge that gap. That way when they come in to see us, they'll know, hey, my mother is forgetting things. We've checked her medications, we've checked her blood sugar, we've checked her blood pressure. We've done things to make sure that nothing else is causing this. That way by the time they come in to see us, we can say, okay, let's do the workup for dementia and see exactly what's going on.
Well, there's still so much more to be talked about. I thank you so much for being with us this morning. And we'll have more information on our Awareness Facebook page about the Dementia Speaks workshop series. Still to come on Awareness, what does it really take to care for a loved one battling this disease?
When it's something in the mind and you can't see, you blame the individual. And as a caregiver and a family member, you don't know how to take that, and so you become angry. And by you becoming angry, it affects everyone.
Different experiences for different families, but for everyone, it's a completely different normal. More about this new reality after the break.
It happened to our family. That's something that we never thought would happen. We learned it was not easy. We kind of had to learn the hard way because people didn't talk about dementia, especially within our culture.
Welcome back to Awareness. Getting a diagnosis of dementia is not something most people want to talk about. Some see it as a disgrace or shameful. But it's not. It is a disease millions of people are suffering with, and alongside those patients are the caregivers.
For my father, being that he had an understanding of what dementia meant, no one in his family in Brazil knew.
Edna Metz's father, Calvino Guimarães, was a scholar. He was very active all his life until he was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. More than a decade later came the dementia.
I said, Dad, of everything that's happening, dementia is really what you're worried about. And that was what he was worried about.
Her dad saw dementia as a disgrace.
That was something that he did not want us to talk about. And so as he was deteriorating after many, many years, his family never knew. His mother passed away without knowing that my father had this disease.
He has since passed away. Metz and her mother are talking about it now to get rid of the stigma and make sure families know what to expect.
It was hard, you know what I mean? I cry a lot.
Day and night, 24/7 care, all provided at home.
Retired, early to be with him because he didn't want to go to a nursing home.
Doctors did mention that it was probably best that he went to a home. But that is something that is not an option. That is something that we don't do.
The MS combined with dementia made caregiving difficult.
None of the providers actually told us that dementia could be part of the disease. And so what we saw is someone who didn't say bad words, someone who wasn't aggressive, being very aggressive, saying bad words, at times being violent. And because we didn't understand it, we thought that he was just depressed, upset, and so he was kind of taking it out on us.
It was a disease they did not understand.
When we started seeing the changes, we assumed it was the person and not the disease.
The person they loved was there physically, but it was the disease they were fighting with.
It is unbelievable. But if I was with him right now, I would do everything again.
He did so much for us, and he brought us to this country for a better life. And so, we owe him. I mean, he's our family, and it's something that it was hard. We went through it, but we would do it again.
Being a caregiver is a full-time job. Most do not see it as a job, but it is a responsibility. While they never want to see their loved ones sick or suffering, it is a responsibility many caregivers would not trade. Joining me now, Tanya Rodriguez-Hodges and James Murray, who are both caring for parents with Alzheimer's. Thank you both so much for being with me this morning.
Thank you for having us.
One thing we saw in that story, the mother said, be patient. That was the best advice she had for other families going through this, because it took some time to realize that what they were dealing with really was the disease and was not the person. But day-to-day life was difficult. What has the day-to-day life been for you with your mother and your father?
I'll let. For me, it's a little bit more complicated, because it's complicated by the fact that we have a father that is healthy, 90 years old, macho, set in his ways, and feels that he knows what's best. Forget about what the doctors say, he knows what's best. So the challenge has been riding that fine line of caring for her and not getting him upset and not losing the authority that he needs to have in order to maintain a level of normal in his life. Mm-hmm. The one thing that I can say about the classes is that they taught me to take the I out of a situation. So it's not about me. And even though I thought I was really great at what I was doing, and I was doing the best job possible, and I was honoring my mother and father and keeping commandment number 5, I didn't realize that I was putting me in a lot of the situations. Mm-hmm. And so leaving that class with Dr. Macy, I realized, and so did my brother, that it's not about us. If she says the sky is purple, doggone it, I'm going to go to the mat with anyone who denies that the sky is purple. It is purple, and that's the way it's going to be.
And what has your experience been like?
My experience has been being able to really understand how to grow in my faith. I'm a pastor, and I was always commended by people of being a servant. James Murray's a servant. He serves God, he serves people. And when I was faced with the responsibility to serve my father, that was truly challenged, because as she was sharing, it's not about you, it's about them, and understanding how you really esteem somebody better than yourself, right. How you make their need your priority. Right. And I was conflicted, with my dad. He was been the backbone of our family. I'm the oldest of 4 children. He was our go-to guy, reliable, hardworking, set an example before us of prayer and hard work. My father grew up in the 50s. He grew up in the 50s as an African-American man. He never was arrested, never spent a night in the hospital, always worked hard, and just was the core and center of our family. Even though our parents are divorced, me and my siblings, he was our go-to guy. Right. And then now we were faced with, now we got to be his go-to people.
Right, a very humbling experience. What did the two of you really had to make sure you learned? You talked about removing the I from the situation, but what have you had to learn in terms of making this difficult adjustment in your lives?
I learned that if my agenda and my schedule and my responsibilities that I committed to, if I put those before his need, then we had conflict. My stress level went up. He didn't have no stress, but I did. And then because of the workshop and because of learning and really accepting my role as his caregiver, that was my first priority, then my stress level decreased. The conflict and the friction and the tension and the challenge of being patient. Because if I had to be somewhere at 9 o'clock and he was like, I'm not getting dressed today, I don't want to wash, no, I want to sit right here, and I'm looking at the clock, then my stress level increased. So now I'm trying to force him to do things that he doesn't want to do.
Right.
Now we're in conflict. His stress level goes up and my stress level is up, and then my caregiving to him is not supportive.
Right. Now, unfortunately we are out of time for this segment, but just really quickly, advice you have for other families.
You have to take yourself out of it, and you have to be as compassionate as you possibly can be and realize that their brain is literally dying. So the anger that you might get from them, the frustration you might get from them is cognitive, and you just have to remember that it's not them.
Right. Thank you both so much for being with us. I really appreciate it. We'll have to continue this conversation.
Okay.
When awareness returns, a new drug with high hopes, plus new effects of 9/11 on the brain. 15 years later, the day we will always remember, how that tragedy is carrying lifelong effects. In the 15 years since the attack on the World Trade Center, many first responders have developed breathing problems, cancer, and other illnesses. Now it appears the events of September 11th also had a major impact on the rescue workers' brains. Researchers at Stony Brook University studied 800 men and women who helped with search, rescue, and cleanup efforts at the World Trade Center. Workers diagnosed with PTSD or major depression after the attacks were more likely to show early signs of degenerative brain disease like Alzheimer's and dementia. Those who experienced frequent flashbacks or nightmares had the highest risk of cognitive decline. Experts say these findings are even more shocking considering the average age of the responders was only 53. An experimental drug for Alzheimer's disease may be showing early promise. Drug maker Biogen developed the drug called aducanumab and funded this latest research. The drug was found to significantly reduce plaques in the brain. Experts believe plaque can play a critical role in the development of Alzheimer's, but researchers are very cautious, saying the study was too small to prove any real clinical benefit. Previous drugs have been encouraging in early trials, then later failed. Stay with us. We'll be right back with the final thought. About 84,000 people are living with Alzheimer's right now in South Carolina. Chances are that number includes someone you know, someone you're close with, or someone you love. It is not a disease to be ashamed of. Don't get me wrong, it is a very awful disease, one that is debilitating and frustrating for everyone involved, but don't let that get in the way of getting educated and learning how to deal with it and help your loved one through it. We have plenty of resources to get you started. Visit our Awareness Facebook page to learn more. That's also where you can share your story of what you're going through so others know they are not alone. I'd like to thank all of our guests this morning. Until next time, I'm Megan Norman. This is Awareness.